everyone. We are in chapter 7 today. I'm going to kind of motivate the chapter by telling you a little bit of a story, and then this will get the gears turning. So once upon a time, there was a professor who will remain unnamed who drank a lot of coffee. And so what we can think about is we can think about the time of day and what they were willing to pay for 1 cup of coffee. So column 1 in your table should be time. Column 2 should be willingness to pay. Okay, this particular person definitely needed coffee in the morning. So at 7 a.m., they were willing to pay up to $5 for a cup of coffee. Like if it was less than that, great, but they were willing to spend up to $5 to get their caffeine. Kind of mid-morning, they needed another boost. So at 10 a.m., they were willing to pay up to $3 for a cup of coffee. At 10 a.m., like it wasn't as necessary that they had the caffeine as it was at 7 a.m., so their willingness to pay is a little bit lower. At like 2 p.m. in the afternoon, they kind of liked another coffee kick, but they didn't like absolutely need it. So at 2 p.m., their willingness to pay was $1. And what we can do with these willingness to pay values is we can plot them. So what we might do is we might have a supply-demand type setup where we have price against quantity. And then let's kind of look at how many cups of coffee per day, so quantity of cups of coffee per day, are demanded at different price levels. Well, first of all, if the price of 1 cup of coffee is $1, well, this person would demand 1 cup at 2 p.m., they demand 1 cup at 10 a.m., they demand another cup at 7 a.m. because at each of these timestamps, they're happy with the $1 price. So throughout the course of the day, they would demand 3 units. And if the price was $3, well, at a price of $3, they'd get a cup at 7 a.m., they'd get a cup at 10 a.m., at 2 p.m., they're not willing to pay $3, they're only willing to pay $1, so they'll scratch the 2 p.m. cup of coffee, and they'll have 2 cups of coffee if the price of each cup is $3. And if the price of each cup of coffee is $5, well, at 7 a.m., they'll go ahead, they'll get that expensive cup of coffee, so that's 1 cup. 10 p.m. or 10 a.m. they'll pass, at 2 p.m. they'll pass, so over the course of one day, they drink 1 cup of coffee if the price is $5. Okay, what I would like you to think about is let's just suppose that in the market, the cup of each coffee, the price of each 1 cup of coffee is $4. So let's just say that this is the price level in the market. So let's just say the price is $4. Well, we know that if the price is $4, then they'll buy 1 cup of coffee over the course of the day, right? Because they'll get the 7 a.m. cup. At 10 a.m., $4 is not worth it for them. At 2 p.m., it's not worth it for them. So at 7 a.m., they get their 1 cup of coffee. They buy it for $4, but they were willing to pay $5 at 7 a.m. So they're kind of like in a nice situation here because there is $1 extra here that they were willing to spend for a cup of coffee that they didn't have to spend. So what this means is if we suppose the price is $4, this person buys 1 cup at a price of $4. They were willing to spend $5. So there is going to be something that we call a consumer surplus of, in this case, $1 because they have this extra $1 that they were willing to spend, but they didn't have to spend it because the price was lower than what they were willing to pay. Okay, let's consider another situation. Suppose that instead of the price of each cup of coffee being $4, suppose the price of each one cup of coffee is $2. Okay, if this is the case, then at 7 a.m., this person buys their coffee because they're willing to spend $5. They only have to pay $2. So when they get this first one cup of coffee at 7 a.m., they were willing to spend $5. They only had to spend $2. So there's like $3 of consumer surplus there for that first one cup. For the second cup they get at 10 a.m., well, at 10 a.m., they're willing to spend $3. They only have to pay $2. So when they get this second cup at 10 a.m., they have a consumer surplus of $1. And so what we see is that over the course of the day, if the static price of one cup of coffee is $2, well, in total, they got $3 of consumer surplus early in the morning. They got $1 consumer surplus later in the morning when they got their second cup. So in total, they have a consumer surplus of $4. So for your notes, let's now suppose the price is $2. This person buys their first cup at $2, but they were willing to pay $5. So we have a consumer surplus, I'm going to abbreviate CS, of $3 right there. Then they buy their second cup at $2, but they are willing to spend $3, or willing to pay for the second cup. They're willing to pay $3 at 10 a.m. So for that second cup, they have a consumer surplus of $1. And so in total, they're going to have $4 of like extra money that they're willing to pay for their daily coffee consumption that they didn't have to pay. Okay, this brings us to several definitions. So I'm going to erase and write, and then hopefully this will make sense. So, so the first definition is just consumer surplus. So we've already talked about it, so hopefully the intuition for consumer surplus is clear in your mind, but let me just give you the official definition. So the definition, we're going to have a couple definitions today, so I'm going to label this Def 1. So the definition of consumer surplus is willingness to pay minus the price that a person actually has to pay. So willingness to pay minus the price a person actually has to pay for a good. Okay, so that's the first definition. The second definition, which I'm kind of doing in backwards order. So Def 2 is the definition of willingness to pay. Again, hopefully it's intuitive what it is, but in case you're trying to say this later and you forget, let's just write it out. So willingness to pay is going to be the maximum amount that a buyer is willing to pay for a good. So max amount or price a buyer is willing to pay for a good. Okay, so these are our two definitions. Okay, one thing that's really nice about consumer surplus is, if you think about it, these dots that I have here, they're effectively dots that exist along the demand curve. And so I have right here a demand curve for one individual person, but in a market you're going to have like a whole bunch of people in the market. There's tons of consumers. And so the scale of this kind of blows up so that we have bigger numbers along the horizontal axis than like 1, 2, and 3. So what this means for us is, if we're trying to calculate in a given market the aggregate consumer surplus across the entire market, which in here would be like the 3 plus the 1, well, all we need to do is we need to trace out the demand curve for the markets and then find the area in that graph that is underneath the demand curve and above the price. So, for instance, suppose we have a demand curve that looks like this, and suppose there's some supply somewhere, and that supply and demand correspond with a particular equilibrium level, and this equilibrium gives us the price in the market. So again, this price is derived because of the equilibrium. Okay, what that means is, from over here we can tell that the consumer surplus was just the vertical distance between the willingness to pay, the demand, and the price. And we said this is basically the demand, and we're just taking the willingness to pay minus the price, and then doing that at each little notch along the quantity, and then adding it up. So if you do this in like a really thorough and iterative process, then what you're effectively doing is you're finding the area of the triangle that exists underneath the demand curve but above the price. So the area of this triangle is going to be equivalent to the amount of consumer surplus that exists in the market. Okay, one helpful hint. The area of a triangle, in case you've forgotten this, is 1/2 base times height. So if you're trying to find the consumer surplus in an overall market, all you need to do is either derive the demand curve, or maybe you'll have a picture of it. The base of the triangle is going to be the quantity that's exchanged. The height of the triangle is going to be the difference between the intercept and the price. So now you have base times height. You multiply those things by 2, and multiply those things by each other and divide by 2, and that gives you the area of the triangle. That is equivalent to the consumer surplus. Okay, one kind of fact that should be obvious, but again, I'm just going to make it really explicit. And that will be it for today. I'm going to make this super short. So the fact that you should be aware of is that a lower price raises consumer surplus. Okay, again, this should be intuitive. The idea is, maybe we start out in a market with this price, this red P. If the price in the market falls, well, maybe now we get to this blue price. This would be the new price level, and so this new triangle is going to be the consumer surplus. And clearly the new blue triangle is larger than the previous green triangle, and so this tells us consumer surplus is larger when the price is lower. Okay, again, intuitively this should make all the sense in the world, because consumers, people who are buying stuff, they like low prices, right? So they have some fixed kind of willingness to pay for a good in their mind, and if that good happens to go on sale one day, well, they're just like even better off because they're kind of getting more surplus relative to what they're willing to pay. Okay, kind of two implicit things in this are that the reason the consumer surplus is bigger is because one, you have these people who are already buying the good. So, like the people who have bought units from zero to Q, each of these people get some more consumer surplus. So, like the existing customers in the market kind of do better off because they're already buying good and now they just have to pay less for it. But what's also going to be true is that there's going to be some people who jump into the market. And so these people who start buying these extra goods, previously they weren't getting any consumer surplus because they weren't participating in the market. They weren't participating in the market because their willingness to pay was lower than the previous price level. But now their willingness to pay is above the existing price level. And so we also get some extra consumer surplus because of these brand new customers who decide to jump into the market and participate. Okay, so again, today is really short and sweet. I kind of killed you last time with a super long lecture, so I'm going to make up for it today. If you haven't read Chapter 7 in the textbook, make sure you go back and do that, and we'll wrap it up next class. And if you have any questions about this in the next 10 minutes, let me know. Otherwise, I will see you then. Okay, for the exercise today, there's kind of two different things I want you to think about. Thing number one is, suppose you have a demand curve that is characterized by this equation that corresponds to this graph. So what we've got here is we have this is slope-intercept form. So this is an intercept of 4, a slope of negative 100. So you go down 1 over 100, get this demand curve. Okay, the first question is, at a price of $1, what is the consumer surplus? So, as a hint, what you would do here is you would basically draw a line at 1, shade in the corresponding triangle, and then calculate the area of that triangle. Question 2 is, forget the graph, and suppose we're thinking about what would happen to consumer surplus in different markets given a particular scenario. So the scenario is, suppose an early freeze in California wipes out half of the lemon crop. Okay, question 2 part 1 is, what will happen to consumer surplus in the lemon market? Okay, let me give you a little bit of a hint here. So the idea is you don't need specific numbers. You just need to think about whether consumer surplus will increase or decrease. So originally there's going to be some equilibrium price. Okay, we're thinking about the lemon market. So if half of the lemons are wiped out, then this is going to affect either the supply or demand. One of these two curves is going to shift. This is going to change the equilibrium. It's also going to change the triangle. So what I want you to think about is, will the triangle that exists after this freeze be bigger or smaller than the existing triangle before the freeze wipes out half the lemon crop? Okay, the second part of this, which will get you thinking a little bit more deeply, is let's now think about the lemonade market. So as a hint, lemons are an input for lemonade. So now let's think about what this same circumstance would do to the consumer surplus in the lemonade market. So we still have this early freeze in California. It wiped out half of the lemons. Okay, think about what that's going to do. Think about what that did to the price of lemons. Lemons are used as an input for lemonade. And now we're going to have, we're going to care about the lemonade market. So there's going to be some equilibrium price of lemonade before the freeze. Then the freeze happens. This is going to change the price of lemons based on the price change in the lemon market. This is going to move either the supply or the demand in the lemonade market. So in the lemonade market, one of these things is going to move. As a result, the whole triangle is going to kind of change. And so you need to think about whether the new triangle in the lemonade market will be bigger or smaller than the initial triangle that represented consumer surplus. Okay, so that's what you need to work through today. I almost got to the end of this chapter, but I didn't quite, just for time purposes. But that means next class I'm going to both finish up this chapter and jump into the next chapter. So before next class, your assignment is to read chapter 8 on your own. Chapter 8 is actually kind of interesting. I'm biased, but I think it's kind of interesting. So it shouldn't be too tedious of a task. So again, next class we'll just finish up chapter 7 and then jump into chapter 8, which is kind of short and interesting. So make sure you're all caught up on your reading. And then if any of this is confusing, again, reach out and I'll answer questions. And other than that, I'll see you next class and enjoy the rest of your day.